Hello, today I will tell you about a case that occurred in the 1980s. This case had remained unsolved. However, nearly 30 years later, a detective decided to reopen the investigation. After examining key details of the case, the detective finally made a breakthrough. This is the case of Kareen Strom. The main character of the story is Kareen Strom, 25 years old. She was an extrovert and noticed by her friends. She lived in Woodcroft, Utah, USA. Woodcroft is a city in David County, Utah. Nearby is the Great Salt Lake, a region known for its beautiful scenery and being the largest saltwater lake in the Western Hemisphere. Kareen grew up with her father and met Steve when she was in high school. It was love at first sight. The two got married right after graduating high school. Like many newlyweds, their life was initially sweet and happy. However, over time, that happy life did not last. Their feelings for each other gradually faded and cracks began to appear. After 3-4 years of living together, Kareen could no longer endure such a life. Therefore, she decided to separate and move to live with her stepmother. However, not long after, bad luck struck her. So, what happened on that day and what did Kareen have to endure? Next, let's rewind time to June 5, 1980. On June 5, 1980, it was a Thursday. Steve, Kareen's husband, had called her a few days prior and said that he wanted to bring her home and take her out for dinner because it was her birthday that day. Since their wedding anniversary was also approaching, Kareen agreed. After dinner, Kareen rested at her husband's house while Steve went to work as usual. He worked the night shift at a factory near the Great Salt Lake. His working hours were from 12:30 a.m. to 7 a.m. The next morning, when Steve had just finished his shift, he called Kareen to remind her to go to work, but received no answer. He called several more times, but also received no response. At that moment, he was very worried, not knowing if something had happened to his wife. So, he immediately drove home. Upon arriving, Steve quickly went to the kitchen to see if Kareen had left any notes for him, but there was nothing. Then, he continued to rush to the bedroom to check. When he pushed open the door, he was stunned by what he saw. Kareen was lying face down on the floor with blood flowing all over her neck. At that moment, he was extremely frightened and quickly called the police. Shortly after, the police arrived at the scene, but it was too late. Kareen had already passed away. Investigators promptly arrived at the scene to investigate and collect evidence. They found Kareen wearing pajamas, her legs pointing towards the wall, her head near the bed, with clear strangulation marks on her neck, as well as some scratches. The bedspread and sheets in the bedroom were on the floor, and the pillows had been thrown off the bed. The TV had fallen from the dresser to the floor, the power was still connected, and the screen was still on. The headboard in the bedroom was made of brass, and 2 brass rods on the headboard had been broken off, one falling completely to the ground. The police assessed that a fierce struggle had taken place at the scene, and that there were no other traces in the house outside of the bedroom. The back door was a sliding door with a bar that could not be opened from the outside, and the front door was still locked. The windows were not damaged. The police speculated that Kareen had likely allowed the perpetrator into the house, or that the perpetrator had a key to enter. Subsequently, the two had a fierce struggle, The scratches on her arms indicated that she had struggled, and eventually, the perpetrator used both hands to strangle her, leading to her death. The police initially concluded that this was a crime committed by someone she knew. After making this determination, the investigators immediately began questioning Kareen's relatives and friends. Someone mentioned that recently she had some emotional disputes with her husband, Steve. Steve also admitted that they were having some marital problems. They had been apart for a while, during which time Kareen lived at her mother's house. But recently, they had been trying to reconcile. On the night of the murder, he even invited her to dinner, and their relationship had warmed up considerably. His statement was partially confirmed by Kareen's stepmother. She said that Kareen had agreed to Steve's request for dinner that day, but Kareen had no intention of getting back together with him. At that time, Kareen had told her that she planned to file for divorce from Steve, and she also felt that their marriage was beyond repair. Therefore, she had tried to ask Kareen not to attend the dinner, but Catherine had said that they were just going to dinner. That would not affect her decision to divorce him. She intended to use the opportunity to discuss the divorce with her husband. After hearing the stepmother's testimony, the investigators felt that Steve's motive for committing the crime had significantly increased. Therefore, they called Steve in for questioning again. This time, the interrogation went beyond the police's expectations. Steve revealed that he knew who the perpetrator was. The person in question was Catherine's latest boyfriend, named Bob. He stated that after their breakup, Catherine started seeing a new person named Bob. Whenever she felt down, she would go to Bob to talk it out, and their relationship was very good. Steve even suggested that Bob might have been jealous of their marital relationship, and, in a fit of rage, had murdered Catherine. The police subsequently immediately located Bob, Catherine's boyfriend. Bob was very cooperative with the police investigation and also asserted that he had nothing to do with the crime. He genuinely loved her, and Catherine reciprocated those feelings. They were both very happy together, and he always wanted Catherine to do what she loved. Relatives and friends of Catherine said that they felt her relationship with her husband was not good at all. When she was with Bob, she was always happy. They also believed that Bob couldn't possibly have harmed her that badly, and that the jealous party must have been Steve, not Bob. Bob had an alibi for the night of the murder. Therefore, the police ruled out Bob as a suspect, and the investigation ended there. The forensic doctor's autopsy report was released. However, due to technical limitations at that time, the forensic doctor couldn't determine the exact time of death. They could only estimate based on the level of food digestion in the victim's stomach and the time of eating. The forensic experts speculated Catherine's time of death to be between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. Steve's working hours on that night started from 3:30 a.m. But that night, he arrived late, clocking in at 12:45 a.m. The travel time from home to the factory was about 25-30 minutes, not too far. Based on the estimated time of the crime, the police hypothesized that Steve could have completed the crime before going to work. Steve's colleagues said that when he arrived at work that night, he appeared very normal, not showing any signs of distress or worry, and did not behave abnormally. Subsequently, another individual was named. He was Steve's colleague, named Owens. Steve and Owens were very close. They often drank, hunted, and fished together. Steve worked the night shift, while Owens worked the middle shift. Therefore, Steve diverted all suspicion toward Owens. The police quickly found Owens. When they met him, they saw that he had many small wounds on his arms and face that looked like scratches. This increased the police's suspicion of him. However, Owens explained that those scratches were caused by metal fragments accidentally grazing him while he was working. The factory supervisor confirmed that metal fragments often fly out during work on cutting machines, and getting scratched by them was quite common. The bruise on his face, he said, came from hitting his head on a piece of equipment while bending down to pick something up during work. Regarding the timeline, Owens stated that after finishing work, he went to a bar to drink with some colleagues and played pool. They drank from 8 p.m. until the bar closed at 4 a.m. the next morning. After that, he returned to the factory at 4:30 a.m. Owens had an alibi, which was confirmed by his colleagues. The investigation showed that Owens had no connection to Catherine. They rarely interacted, and the police found no motive for Owens to commit the crime. Hence, Owens was also excluded from the list of suspects. Following police investigation procedures, Owens' DNA samples and hair were preserved. Additionally, photographs were taken of the wounds on Owens' body as evidence. By that point, the two suspects provided by Steve had both been ruled out by the police. Therefore, the police believed that Steve had been lying. His statements were not only inconsistent, but he also had the greatest motive to commit the crime. Furthermore, Steve had no alibi for the time of Catherine's death. In theory, he had ample time to commit the crime. Subsequently, the police issued an arrest warrant for him and charged him with first-degree murder. All evidence related to the case was presented in court. However, that evidence was all circumstantial and not entirely convincing. In December 1980, the court acquitted the defendant Steve of first-degree murder charges, and he was released from court. Catherine's relatives were very dissatisfied with the court's verdict. The case turned into an unsolved mystery. However, Catherine's sister, Karen, did not give up. She continuously searched for evidence and hoped to find the killer. She considered it her life's mission and awaited the day when the truth would come to light. 26 years after the incident, in 2006, as usual, she continued to visit the police station to inquire about the progress of her sister's case. For 26 years, she had persistently visited the police station. The police always responded that there were no new leads, but in reality, they had nearly abandoned the old case. There was a detective named Benson who was very impressed by her perseverance. Hence, he began to delve into the unsolved case that had occurred 26 years ago. During his research, Benson made a request to his superiors, hoping to reopen the investigation. He and she collaborated to uncover new evidence. Subsequently, Benson's request was approved by his superiors, and the case was officially reopened in January 2007. Detective Benson examined all the physical evidence from the time. He saw Kateen's fingernails and thought that there might be the murderer's DNA inside. In the 1980s, when the case happened, DNA technology had not yet been used for solving crimes. Therefore, there had been no DNA tests conducted on Kateen's fingernails at that time. Hence, Benson immediately sent the fingernails to a laboratory for DNA testing. While waiting for the test results, Benson called one of the suspects, Owens. When the call was made, Detective Benson said, "Hello, I am Detective Benson, and I am reinvestigating Kateen's case. I hope you can help me with some questions." Owens, on the other end, sounded extremely nervous, his voice shaky, and he evaded many of Benson's questions. This made Benson vaguely feel that Owens might know the details of the case. The DNA report results confirmed Benson's hypothesis. The results showed the presence of DNA from both Steve and Owens on the fingernails. Benson then requested a forensic doctor to reassess the time of Kateen's death. The forensic doctors used advanced technology based on the recorded body temperature and the surrounding environmental temperature at that time to determine that Kateen died at around 12:30 a.m. We all know that Steve clocked in at the factory at 13:45 a.m. The distance from his home to the factory would take at least 25 minutes. If he committed the crime, the earliest he could have reached the factory would be around 12:55 a.m. Therefore, the suspicion against Steve could be ruled out. Owens, on the other hand, had an alibi that he was drinking at a bar from 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. the next day. So why was Owens' DNA found on Kateen's fingernails? Benson then sought out Owens' colleagues, who drank with him that night. They recalled drinking and playing pool together, but were not sure if Owens had been with them all night. Therefore, it's possible that Owens left and returned to them that night. They also remembered seeing scratches on Owens the day after and heard him say that these were dog scratches, contrary to his initial claim that they were workplace injuries. At that point, the police considered Owens a serious suspect and wanted to bring him back to the station for questioning. However, they were a step too late. He had left a farewell letter for his wife, stating he would never return. Owens had fled. Tracking records showed that Owens escaped to Texas and then moved to Mexico. This once again brought the case to a standstill. In March 2007, the case took another turn. Police received information that Owens had run out of money and could not continue living in Mexico. He was forced to return to the U.S. Detective Benson, upon receiving the news, tried to contact Owens and said, "I have enough evidence to file for an arrest warrant for you. I urge you to surrender immediately." With no way out, Owens turned himself in at the police station, where he would face first-degree murder charges. During Owens' custody, the police uncovered a dark history. In 1972, a woman named Kimberly was walking along Hermosa Beach, California. Owens attacked her with the intention of committing a nefarious act and strangled her with his hands, intending to kill her. Kimberly fought back with all her might and eventually escaped. She called the police, and Owens was arrested. He was tried in California, where Kimberly identified Owens as her attacker that day. However, Owens' family provided him with an alibi, leading to his acquittal. The case ended there. Similarly, in Kateen's case, Owens' family hired a top attorney in California to defend him. Upon his arrival, the attorney presented a critical finding. The DNA under Kateen's nails was not skin, but semen. Therefore, it was not a murder case. Owen's lawyer also stated that this was merely a case of consensual sexual assault, implying that the two were having an affair. Furthermore, Owens only went to Texas to visit a friend. Later, he went to a border town in Mexico to spend the day. During this time, he received news that he might face a murder charge, which prompted his return. Subsequently, prosecutors dropped the case against Owens due to insufficient evidence, and he was released. Detective Benson reviewed all the physical evidence again in 1980 and hoped to find even the smallest clue from them. He digitally processed the photos of the case. Through calculations, he hoped not to miss any tiny details. After tireless efforts, Detective Benson finally found a very faint red stain on one of Kadeen's clothing items. Thinking it looked like a drop of blood, Detective Benson immediately contacted the lab and asked them to test the red stain. That drop of blood had been there for decades, making it very difficult to detect. However, the effort paid off, and the next day, the report showed that the blood belonged to Owens. With such solid evidence, prosecutors reopened the case against Owens in March 2009. In court, faced with undeniable evidence, Owens finally admitted to his crime. May 21st, 2009 was Owens' sentencing day. On that day, events took a different turn. Owens pled guilty and claimed that he was the one who killed Kadeen, but the mastermind behind the entire incident was Kadeen's husband, Steve. A few months before the incident, Steve had met Owens and asked him to carry out the task. Owens refused initially. Later, Steve purchased a life insurance policy for Kadeen. If she met with an accident, Steve would receive a substantial sum. Steve also promised Owens half of the money if everything went smoothly. Steve gave Owens a key to enter the house. After getting in, Owens did not take immediate action, but rather urged Kadeen to leave quickly, telling her that Steve wanted to kill her and she should run away and never look back. Kadeen didn't believe what Owens said and even cursed and kicked him out. At that moment, Owens changed his mind and attempted to sexually assault her, but she resisted. In the end, he strangled her with his hands. In the hearing, Steve naturally denied all of Owens' claims. When the police investigated, they found that Steve had indeed purchased a life insurance policy for his wife. The insurance was a factory benefit with coverage of nearly $50,000. It was just an ordinary insurance policy. Therefore, there was no way to press further charges. Finally, after 2 days of deliberation, the court declared Owens guilty and sentenced him to life imprisonment. It took a total of 29 years to close the case. If Detective Benson hadn't reopened the investigation, this case might have remained unsolved forever. Sadly, though the case was resolved, we do not know if what Owens said was true or whether Steve was the actual mastermind of the crime. After the case concluded, media reporters interviewed Kadeen's aunt. She responded to the journalists over the phone, saying, "I know the one who killed my sister is in prison, and he did it." In the end, whether Steve was the mastermind remains a mystery, as stated on Kadeen's grave. Only God knows.